have enough complex material here. We've got, I think I counted it up, 11 or 12 class meetings left. So we're gonna, you could be expecting another exam in just about 2 weeks today, around that time. We gotta move quick. We still have heredity to take care of, so. Guys. We have to cover genetics, which will include heredity. We have got, and that includes how proteins are made, transcription and translation, so we've got a lot of heavy material still to go.
The next exam will cover which chapters? 10.
Ones that are listed right there.
Okay, 10, 11, 12. Thank you.
It'll be 10, 11, and 12. Some of these we won't cover. We cover a large part of the chapter, but not all of them. So, first one here is a tough one. We just got through doing cellular respiration. Now we are going to do the opposite of it. We learned how to take glucose and break it down to get energy. Now we're going to see how glucose is made. That's photosynthesis. So, and we're going to move, as I say, fairly quickly. Photosynthesis, remember, is taking sunlight, turning it into chemical energy. Chemical energy is the stored energy. All of the energy, almost all of the energy that all organic creatures get come from the sun. There are some bacteria that have learned to metabolize. They will be down in some of the deep vents in the ocean, so they can actually break chemicals apart and get energy. Those are exceptions. There's not very many. Bacteria do. But for most purposes, all energy comes from the sun. So if you're asking the question, where does energy come from? The sun. Autotroph is one of these organisms that can take the energy from the sun and then turn it into, they must get carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They must have water. You will see what happens to it. Whenever a plant or any organism gets its energy from the sun and turns it into food, that's called photoautotroph. Remember, plants are doing this for their benefit, not for anybody else's. They don't go through photosynthesis to feed large animals. They go to it because they have to have energy. They have to grow the same as anything else does. So photoautotroph, they use sunlight to make organic molecules. There are different kingdoms that can do this. Photosynthesis can be in plants, in the plant kingdom, algae, in the protist or protozoan kingdom, other protists like Euglena, for example, and even some prokaryotes go through photosynthesis. One, the most common is blue-green algae. It's not algae. Now, when you get into 1082, you'll talk a lot about cyanobacter. That's blue-green algae. It's blue-green algae, but it's actually a bacteria. It's not algae. So it's one of the prokaryotes that can go through photosynthesis. Shows you just some of the plants. Algae, purple sulfur bacteria is the one we're talking about that can live off chemicals. Cyanobacteria, they link together to look like strings and colonies, but they are individual bacteria. Heterotrophs cannot make their own food. They must get it from an autotroph. And here's something we don't hear a lot about, or the importance of it. you hear a lot of talk, ecology and environmental, and I've got a degree in it, folks, but you hear a lot of talk about what's the world's big problems. We don't touch on what the real problems are. Number one, there's number one problem in the world that's the cause of every other problem we've got, and that's overpopulation, overuse. Everything can be linked to it. Another one is we are polluting the ocean at a rate that is dangerous for us. We must have an oxygen level in the atmosphere of about 17 to 18% to survive, to be able to live. Current oxygen levels are 21%. Most of the atmosphere is made up of things like nitrogen and argon gas. So with oxygen, we need about 21%. But remember this, there is not enough land plants to provide us a concentration of oxygen we need. A large part comes from the ocean. And all the little phytoplankton and the little one-cell creatures that float in through, that go through photosynthesis, release oxygen. If we ever get to the point where the ocean becomes so polluted that it cannot produce the oxygen, we're done, period. We don't have enough oxygen from the plants. The oxygen, or the oceans are being contaminated enormously by many countries. Russia and China still pretty much take all their hard waste and just take it out to the ocean on rafts and dump it. Dump 55-gallon barrels full of very toxic chemicals, maybe even nuclear waste, we don't know for sure. That's done. There is a floating island of plastic and garbage in the Indian Ocean. A big airplane, the Indonesian, went down, they couldn't find it, they searched and searched for it. They were afraid one of the reasons because of that floating island of trash, which is actually larger than most of our states in the United States. It's that big.
Where is it?
In the Indian Ocean, as I stated. Then, it's causing shipping problems. Ships can't get through it. There's cables thrown in with these floating. They have to turn their engines off. They just try to float through it because it will get hung in their motors. They avoid it. And it is almost the size of Australia. And it's not far off the coast of Australia in the Indian Ocean. So that's a big problem. And with all of the other things, every stream in the world runs into the ocean at some point in time. So all the things it carries. With the current, if we get increased acid rain, it comes down and acidifies the ocean and stops that photosynthesis from taking place. And as I say, drop down a few points, we're done. So it's a big deal. Photosynthesis is not only providing food, oxygen. All of the fossil fuels that we have now came from plant matter or invertebrates, mostly plant matter. Coal is compacted plants that have been there for millions of years, that was in a swamp, was compacted as the plants died. They didn't decay, they fossilized and became coal. Most of the oil is little invertebrates and things such as that, but they are fossil fuels. And the key to it is, all of those fossil fuels, the energy came from the sun because they were plants. Chloroplasts are an organelle that organisms use to conduct photosynthesis. They probably came from bacteria, just like the mitochondria and all the others did. Chlorophyll itself, the chloroplast, remember the chloroplast is the organelle. The color is green because that is a light wave reflected. It is not absorbed. As the plants absorb energy to make sugars, some of the wavelengths are not used. That is the green wavelength, and that's why it's reflected back to us, because it's not used. If every wavelength is absorbed, the color is black. if every wavelength is reflected, the color is white. Actually, black is the opposite color. So, it's the pigments that will reflect or absorb certain colors. Whenever I go out west, we've got friends out around El Paso, Juarez, Mesilla, New Mexico. Every car that you see will be white, just about or light colored, because it gets so hot out there around the Chihuahuan Desert that it'll melt paint off the hood of a dark colored car eventually. So they have light colored cars because it reflects, doesn't absorb the heat that comes in. Skin of a polar bear is black. Even though a polar bear has translucent hairs, they're not white, they're translucent. And they look that creamy, dirty yellow color. But the actual skin of a polar bear is black because it wants to absorb all of the heat energy that it can, that's in underneath those hairs to stay warm.
So what is the main thing that we need to remember about the light? Just basically what's on the slide.
What's on the slide? Chlorophyll's the organelle, and notice here, chloroplasts are the organelle that, or chlorophyll's the pigment. Chloroplasts are the organelle that contains the chlorophyll. Chloroplasts are found mainly in cells in a specific layer. That's kind of, think of a sandwich, and think of the internal parts of the sandwich as being the mesophyll, the middle layer. That's where the chloroplasts are located. And as it says, every mesophyll cell contains 30 to 40 chloroplasts, so there are a lot of them. To make sugar, chlorophyll captures energy. Chlorophyll is then going to take that energy and phosphorylate ADP to make ATP. ATP can then be used to make whatever product sugar that's being made. In order to make that sugar, it must have carbon and oxygen. That comes from carbon dioxide. It also must have hydrogen, which it gets from water. It splits the water molecule. It takes the hydrogen and gives the oxygen in the water molecule off as a gas then. Now you will probably get a question. Where does the carbon and oxygen and hydrogen in sugar come from? Carbon and oxygen come from carbon dioxide. Hydrogen from water. The chlorophyll itself is in the membranes of sacs. These little sacs are called thylakoids. And they're often stacked. Look like little coins stacked on top of each other. And the actual column is called the granite. You'll get to see a picture. Chloroplasts also contain a fluid called stroma. There is another term called stoma. Do not confuse them. Stroma is the fluid inside of chloroplast. And if we look right here at this setup, you take a section of a leaf, as you see up there, and look at it. This is that middle layer, like the sandwich. All these dark green dots are cells, and the light green are the mesophyll cells. The stomata are openings in the leaf. It is through these stomata that carbon dioxide can come in and plants, or can let oxygen out. Stroma is the fluid inside of the chloroplast. This is what the chloroplast looks like blown up. These little individual things are the thylakoids, and the stacks are called granite. That is where the chlorophyll is actually located, inside of those.
You said that the stoma was the liquid?
Stroma is the liquid.
Stroma. Thank you.
Stomata are the openings. little valves that let things in and out, right there.
What's the stoma then? You said there's,
Liquid.
is that just
Stroma is the liquid.
right? The stoma.
I said that's similar to other things, just a lot of
Oh, okay.
different terms. Stoma is a prefix for a lot of things.
Is the stroma the liquid inside of the thylakoids or just in the
The
chloroplasts
stroma
in
is
general?
the liquid inside here of the chloroplast.
Okay.
These
I
sit in that liquid.
Okay.
And it's a rather thick liquid. So look at these individual mesophyll cells, those are chloroplasts. Now what's going to happen as an overview, remember we said like in an electron shell, you can only have so many electrons, the energy of so many. In chlorophyll, what's going to happen is every electron and molecule is moving. Everything's moving, slowly, so fast. But those, whenever the sunlight hits them, the photons impart energy on them and make them absorb more energy than what they can hold. They can hold it just for a small split second, then they gotta give it up. They give it up to ADP, which uses that energy, then phosphorylate to become ATP. So those electrons capture energy, give it to ADP, ADP becomes ATP, then ATP can be used by the parts of the cell to make, for example, glucose. That very simple sugar, remember, is CH2O. You put 6 of those together and you have glucose. That is what photosynthesis does. We are going to learn it step by step. You should recognize this by now. If we go C6H12O6 plus 6CO2 plus water gives us 6CO2 and H2O, that is cellular respiration. It's just going in different directions. Now, when we start out with carbon dioxide, water, and energy to make sugar, that is photosynthesis. So you need to know that. The only difference between that and cellular respiration is just flip what's on the left side of the arrow to the right side and the right to the left, and you've got the same formula. There's no difference. This is very important. Chloroplasts split a water molecule into the hydrogen and oxygen. It uses the hydrogen for the sugar and releases the oxygen as a byproduct that goes off into the atmosphere, which is what we breathe. And notice, as I said, photosynthesis is just the opposite of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration, hopefully you put on the exam, was a catabolic process, right? Because it breaks down a big molecule, gives energy. So what kind of pathway is photosynthesis?
Anabolic.
It has to be anabolic. It's taking things and making bigger molecules. So photosynthesis is endergonic. It absorbs energy. It uses it. And like cellular respiration, photosynthesis is a redox, a oxidation reduction reaction. Water is oxidized. It gives up its hydrogen. And CO2 is reduced. CO2 takes that hydrogen. And what does it make? CH2O, that simple sugar. And as we said, it's an endergonic process. Yeah.
When you asked that question of, let me see, sorry, you were asking that question about where the sugars, the carbons, hydrogens, oxygens come from. So basically, they come from the reactants, right? Is that what we're saying, or what we said?
Sugar.
Sorry, not the reactants, actually.
Plant takes in carbon dioxide. carbon dioxide is reduced with a hydrogen from the water molecule. That makes the CH2O. You put 6 of those together, you got glucose.
So for the question, where does like the hydrogen, the carbon, the oxygen
Hydrogen
come
comes
from?
from water, carbon dioxide provides carbon and oxygen.
And
The
the
oxygen
sugar.
from water is released as a gas. That's what we breathe. Comes out of the plant.
Okay.
Now, one thing that is a little bit different is the electron carrier. There has to be electron carriers in this process, just as there was a cellular respiration. Plants use a different setup. It's NADP positive as opposed to NAD positive, but it still is reduced by the hydrogen. the same way. So in the plants, it's NADPH instead of NADH. And I can't remember what, I think that's some kind of phosphate. It's obviously phosphates is in there some way. But it still does basically the same thing as NADH. And notice it generates ATP from ADP by phosphorylation. Now, there's 2 parts of photosynthesis that you need to learn, and you will learn if you pass. The light reaction and the dark. You may have heard in high school or junior. It's also called light reaction and the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle is the same as the dark cycle. Now, the light reaction must have light in order for it to occur. The dark reaction does not have to be in the dark. So that's why they call it the Calvin cycle now instead of the dark. The dark reaction just refers to the fact it doesn't need light. Some plants evidently do prefer the dark. They make more of the product, the sugar, if they do have intermittent periods of darkness. Some plants it doesn't matter. But there's nothing real solid on whether plants do or don't, no general statement. Some seem to do better in the dark, but they can still go through and make the product. So here are what these 2 parts of photosynthesis does. The first part, the light reaction, captures energy. The second part, the Calvin cycle, uses that energy to make a sugar. So the light reactions capture energy. How do they do that? We've talked about the thylakoids. That's where the sunlight's coming in. They split the water molecule to release the oxygen. They reduce NADP to NADPH, pick up that hydrogen electron. And then they use that energy to make ATP by phosphorylation of ATP. That's what happens in the light reaction. It's more complicated than that, as you will see. The Calvin cycle makes the sugar. Because that sugar, once again, it's a carbon base, and we're adding hydrogen and things to it, it says the Calvin cycle begins with the process called carbon fixation, which is taking that carbon dioxide and making an organic molecule out of it. Carbon fixation. Notice here, the light reaction is taking place primarily in those thylakoids, right? The Calvin cycle is in that fluid that the thylakoids are in, the stroma. That's where it's taking place. Now notice here what's happening. Light comes in, hits the leaf, photons are carrying energy. That energy is going to go into the chloroplast, into the thylakoids that contain the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll electrons will become excited, pass that energy to ATP to be phosphorylated. in the process, it also splits the water molecule. So notice here, we've got the thylakoids and we've got light coming in. It is in this part to where water comes in. Light reactions occur, and ATP comes in, it's in the stroma, ADP comes in the stroma, and organic phosphate comes in, and then we get ATP made and an electron carrier. Notice, leaving the system is oxygen. Water comes in, it is split, keeps the hydrogen, uses that hydrogen to make this electron carrier right here, where the hydrogen goes, and then the oxygen leaves. Next step, the Calvin cycle. This energy and that hydrogen go into the Calvin cycle. This is where the carbon dioxide comes in. The carbon dioxide comes in, and then we wind up with a sugar being made. CH2O, the simplest form. Now that's an overview of photosynthesis. It gets more complicated. The light reaction is divided into two parts. Photosystems 2 comes first. Photosystem 1 comes second, which is, I wish someone would change that because it's backwards to what we would think. But it's written that way because photosystem 1 was discovered first, and that was the second part. They didn't know there was a part before that, so when they discovered it, they had to name it photosystem 2, but it comes first. It would make more sense to me if they would change the number of that, but they've not. So photosystem 2 is the first step, photosystem 1 is the second. That makes up the light reactions. Remember, important things, the question you'll get, what happens in light reactions? Make sure you understand. Water is split, oxygen is given off, NADPH, and ATP is generated. What's going to happen to the Calvin cycle? Carbon dioxide comes in, hydrogen comes in with that NADPH, energy comes in, that energy is then used to make this simple sugar, CH2O, and that's the one, if you take 6 of those, then you've got a glucose molecule. Glucose is C6H12O6. So if you just take 6 of these and add those together, we've got glucose.
Okay, so the electron carrier from the previous reaction, the light reaction, and the ATP generated there is used to power the Calvin cycle to make the sugar, and carbon dioxide provides the carbon and the oxygen. Okay.
And the hydrogen's laying on that carrier.
Okay.
See?
Good. Thank you.
Simple little thing. Now let's look at wavelengths. If you've been in my class, we use the spectrophotometer a lot. We've done these things. I think most of you guys that I've had in class can find an unknown liquid, what its wavelength is on your own, which is a very good thing to be able to do. You can take that machine and somebody give you something you don't know what it is, you figure out what its wavelength is and eventually find it out. We use this electromagnetic spectrum, the light that's coming, the rays of energy coming from the sun. Part of that we can see, that is called visible light. A large part we cannot see, and you'll get to see what they are. If you go into electricity, waves have a high point and a low point. They make like a sine curve. They go up and down. If you had a graph, an XY graph, at a graph, the waves travel like a roller coaster, like the waves that would be if you threw a rock in water. The height of these is called the amplitude. What we are concerned is the space between these two crests will be the frequency. In other words, if we have something that has a wavelength like that, and then we've got one that's like that, this has a higher frequency because you've got more crest in the same amount of space. Same thing works with radio. Remember, radio waves, cell phone waves, they travel in these waves. And AM radio, it's like these little short ones. They actually don't carry, they carry energy and things, but they don't go far. Big other waves will travel and do more. So we'll see that in a minute. So wavelength is the distance between the crests of the waves. And the wavelength determines the type of energy. That wavelength, remember, is basically energy. It's carrying energy. The electromagnetic spectrum is the scale of all of these wavelengths, the entire range of the energy for radiation. Visible light is what we can see. That's what does photosynthesis. It says light also behaves as though it consists of discrete particles, photons. This is the EMS, the electromagnetic spectrum. Look at these. Notice, the longer the wavelength, the lower the energy. The longer the wavelength. The shorter the wavelength, the higher the energy. How much energy does it say how far it's going to travel?
So the wavelength is the distance between the two crests, which means that if you have more crests, you have more energy, so that's the higher energy, right? More crests, so that's the...
That's what it's saying.
Right, okay.
Shorter wavelength has higher energy. There's more of them in a space.
So it's a higher
Longer
frequency.
wavelength has lower energy. The longer wavelengths will actually travel farther.
So those are the lower frequency and these are the higher frequency is basically what we're saying?
These are the shorter wavelengths, which is going to be higher frequency.
Right, okay.
Remember, we're going in nanometers here. We're kind of going, and all that negative and positive mess you up. Remember, something can have a number that big be negative and smaller than 0.1, even though it's got a lot bigger number. Look here, see these numbers up here, they're negative. These are positive. Don't worry about the wavelengths like that. I'm not going to ask you short wavelengths and higher, that's more physics. I want you to notice the visible light spectrum. This shows you the wavelengths of the visible light spectrum. And we've done chlorophyll. Most of you came up with the chlorophyll pigment that we were able to extract. We also had some yellow in there. We never had the pure green, but we came up with it what we come into like the 340s, 440s. There's different peaks depending on through the scale. In other words, green will absorb a lot of different ones. It's just going to absorb this more than some of the others. Now, if we are looking at chlorophyll, between basically 500 and about, well, between 500 and 600, there's not much being absorbed in photosynthesis. Okay? Blues, these violets, that's where we're going to get a lot of the absorption in the reds. That's what's going to be used to drive photosynthesis. This area here, not so much. This is the green, that's what we see reflected. Okay?
So it's mostly the blue and violet, but not the red, not over here?
No, the red thing.
Okay, and the red. So basically everything except the green and around the green mostly.
The yellow doesn't do a lot either. The yellow pigment now.
Okay.
And remember, chlorophyll absorbs all of this, but it doesn't absorb that way. So yellow is going to absorb a lot, but not yellow.
Because it reflects the green.
That's what we're seeing. Okay. And look at a few other things, just X-rays, for example, are very short waves. They have a lot of energy. They can penetrate things. A radio X-ray can go through your body and show up pictures of your bones, right? Can't do that with a radio wave because it doesn't have that much energy. These actually travel further, even though they have the bigger amplitudes and frequencies. That's why microwaves, which is what cell phones are. You shoot those big, long waves up against a cell tower, and then it bounces in further and just, these big waves, think of it, they just go up, they'll hit the atmosphere and bounce, hit the earth and bounce back up and keep going. These little things will just penetrate stuff until they run out of energy and they're done. So if you put up a lead wall right there, you don't get any signals for either one of them. But X-ray will penetrate tissue, for example, and take a picture of the bones. It will reflect it back. But it doesn't travel very far. If you're far enough away from it, then you don't feel the effects because it dies out.
So is that also kind of what the whole wavelength thing that you got going there? Does that kind of also affect like how FM radio coverage
It's red
areas?
big radio.
You know, like the coverage areas of the radio station that it serves.
Yep. When you, FEM stands for frequency modulation in a radio wave. AM stands for amplitude modulation. So radio waves are going to be down in through some of these lower things like you see in through there. Even in AM, when you get up to a bigger station like WLW, these wavelengths, it will go a lot further than some of these little ones like 550 or something around here does, because those bigger waves will travel far.
Yeah, because WLW covers like a humongous area.
States, a lot of different states where these don't.
All the way down to
So,
Tennessee.
but that's, you gotta understand though too, that radio waves is talking about two different things when you see AM and FM. It's the modulation, what are they changing? So, we're concerned with this area between 380 and 750. Those are the wavelengths that will be available. Now also remember this about plants in photosynthesis. If you go out now and look at leaves, leaves are starting to change color. And the reason is, as the year starts to get colder, the intensity of the light coming in is less. Trees will get rid of their leaves so they do not have to feed them in the winter. They are not taking in enough sunlight to go through photosynthesis to make enough sugar for the plant to feed the leaves and everything. So what it does, it simply gets rid of the leaves, drops them, takes all of the sap, brings it down underneath the ground in the roots, so they will not freeze in the wintertime. And then it just sits there dormant, like we see trees without leaves in the winter. it's easier for them to grow new leaves in the spring than it is to try to feed these all winter. In the process of doing that, when it starts to shut down photosynthesis, the chlorophyll is the first pigment to break down and go away. So when the chlorophyll breaks down and goes away, then you can start to see some of these other pigments, like the red pigments, or the blue or purplish and yellows and browns. All of those come about because chlorophyll masked them because it's stronger whenever they were all present. But once chlorophyll's gone, now you can start to see those other colors. That's why the leaves change colors. So these pigments basically are the receptors of the light. They absorb visible light, different pigments, different wavelengths. Wavelengths not absorbed are reflected. That's why we copy certain things with whatever color that it has. Leaves appear green because chlorophyll reflects and transmits green. If you were in total darkness, no object would have color. The only thing we see as color are light waves that a certain pigment will reflect back. If you're in total darkness, they're not reflecting light, so they have no color. It's an appearance. Most of you guys should know what the spec does. We've got a light source, a prism that we can control what wavelength we want coming through. We can shoot that particular wavelength through a solution. In this case, it's your chlorophyll. We've got a meter that will read it, and then we can figure it out. Now, we use the bottom one here, absorption, is what we're looking for. We're not looking for the transmittance. It works the same way, it's just which way the directions the meter going. For what we measure, there's very little transmittance. It's mostly absorbance, so that's what we're looking at. But that is a spec machine. There are many different kinds of spectrophotometers. If you ever watch any of the crime shows, like where they send samples of whatever off, there are some of these machines that you can take a liquid, put them in it. When it comes out, it will make a graph of the elements. Every element will have that specific frequency that it measures. And now they will actually tell you what the molecular formula is of that solution and how much of it's in there. So you can put that in there and it'll come back, okay, this person had drugs, cocaine in their blood. It will give them the chemical formula of it. So you can just pop it in there. It used to be in the past, you'd have to do different individual tests to see this thing, not anymore. But it takes a long time. DNA and things, something that you'll see in 1082, takes some time to run all of those to get that. But that's basically the way that it works. Yeah.
Should we remember this for
No.
the, okay.
Chlorophyll A. Two types of chlorophyll pigment, A and B. They have different frequencies. And that makes them better able to get more of the light energy out of light for photosynthesis. These other pigments that we were talking about are not in as much quantity as chlorophyll, and they are called accessories, carotenoids, things such as some of the oranges and reds. And as it says, chlorophyll can be damaged with the wrong frequencies, and so some of these other pigments, the reason you've got the leaves in there, it's more efficient. They can absorb things that the chlorophyll can't. Be able to draw that for next time. I'm joking.
I was like,
I didn't draw it either, wouldn't want to. I'd worry about myself if I could. Okay, chlorophyll. As it says here, these electrons in chlorophyll will get excited when hitting the sunlight. To fall back to their normal state, they give off that energy. That is what fluorescence is, actually. And if you took your chlorophyll, put a black light on it, fluorescent light, you'll fluoresce, it'll glow, because of those electrons capturing the energy. Photo systems. These are the two things that I said the light reaction are in two parts. They are photo system 1 and 2, but the way they appear in the cycle is photo system 2 is first, photo system 1 is second. Notice what it is. They consist of a reaction center complex, which is a protein, surrounded by light harvesting molecules. The light harvesting complexes are the pigment molecules bound to proteins. This shows you one right here. This is the protein. These are the little molecules, chlorophyll, that are going to pick up the energy. And we will see exactly how that works. This is the way the protein actually works if you were to look at it structurally. But this is a good little example right here. These, just remember the chlorophyll, they're going to capture the light, send it to two particular chlorophyll molecules, where it will go up to this little place called the reaction center, and we'll see what happens to that next time. So we'll pick up with these complexes next go.